Hello, and welcome to the final lecture for English 421Y. In this lecture, I will focus on the visual requirements for the incident analysis report, which includes using page design consistent with formal long reports and the use of both original and cited visuals to complement and enhance the material that you found during your research. While this is a writing class, as we've seen throughout the semester, how you present and design information is often just as persuasive and impactful as what you present. Design plays a pivotal role in organizing information and engaging the reader, but it also conveys many of the specific genre conventions readers have come to expect. For instance, formal long reports have a large number of front and back matter, including a title page, table of contents, lists of figures, appendices, etc. While these organize content, there are also standards that signal this is a report. If you picked up a report and it didn't have a title page or a table of contents, you wouldn't necessarily know it was a report. So one of the readings that I've asked you to do for this unit is Charles Koselnick's Supratextual Design, the Visual Rhetoric of Whole Documents. As Koselnick argues, supratextual design elements are the global design of the document and include elements of documents that usually are considered exterior, peripheral, or unimportant. Koselnick's argument is that supratextual design is rhetorical because it impacts how the reader navigates and responds to the content of the document, and because it impacts how readers respond to other documents that share similar genre conventions. As I said, if you read a report that has a table of contents, a title page, and appendices, and you read a second report that has the same thing, a table of content, appendices, and title page, then you read a third report that doesn't have any of those things, you're going to wonder, why doesn't this one have what the others have? Those are genre conventions. You learn them over time. In Table 1 on page 12, Koselnick breaks down supratextual design into three categories: textual, spatial, and graphic. I won't go over these in detail because they should be familiar to you already from other work we've done this semester, but I think Koselnick's perspective on how they work together is useful. Within a document, he writes, these three elements work in concert, modifying, complementing, and constraining each other while creating a global visual language that guides readers from the top down. Koselnick's distinction between the stylistic and structural functions of supratextual design is also useful as it encompasses arrangement, organization, and juxtaposition, that is, structural elements, as well as tone, professionalism, emphasis, identity, and usability, that is, stylistic elements. So the textual, the spatial, and the graphic all work together to inform how we read something and what we think of as both the organization and the style of a document. Finally, Koselnick makes an interesting point. Often, supratextual design is out of the hands of the author. As you're looking over different reports and finding examples of different designs that you might use, you might notice that a lot of white papers use a company logo or design scheme. This is common for technical writing, which often assumes a collective author, that is, a company or a team or a group, rather than an individual writer. Scientific journals also designate a particular page design or visual style, which is why we have citation. APA style, for example, is the required style for the American Psychological Association's journals. It's not uncommon for editors of books, magazines, or newspapers to change the layout, design, or style of a work after it leaves the author's hands. I bring this up not to discourage you, but rather to show you how important supratextual design is to how organizations, companies, and brands establish themselves. In other words, if you work for a company, they're going to tell you, do it this way, organize it this way, use this color, use this logo, use this typeface. So getting in that habit now of designing, knowing that you're going to be developing and using consistent style and structural design and style guides at a later point is useful. Individual writers and designers can still exert quite a lot of influence, but they need to be assertive and argue for why certain design elements are important or necessary or rhetorically effective. As Kostelnik writes, sometimes all we can do is vigilantly attend to supertextual design, right down to the last-minute production details, even though absolute control may not be practical or, in the visually conventional environment of a complex organization, possible or even desirable. For Unit 4, there are many different ways you can format your report, but certain elements have become standard in most long technical reports or white papers. I have asked you to look at examples of white papers to see how design decisions impact a larger document. White papers are research reports commonly developed by businesses or the government about a specific topic. While their purpose is different than an incident analysis report, the design of the document is consistent with other reports, and there are tons of examples out there. So to find a sample report, go to Google, type in white paper, PDF, and then your topic. So I did white paper PDF mining. So this brings up all of the white papers that are full-page PDFs about that topic. So when I did this, I eventually found an example on mining from IBM. So clicking on any of these will bring up reports. Looking at multiple reports, looking at several different formats will give you a sense of how white papers are designed. So when I searched for white paper PDF mining, I found this IBM white paper entitled The Future of Mining. Unlike many of the federal reports I had found while researching the Gold King mine disaster, the example that I gave in lecture number 9, the IBM white paper has a very striking visual layout with a number of organizational and design choices and stylistic choices that effectively break up the information and call attention to key points of the document. For example, the first 3 pages introduce a 2-column format, introduces consistent accent colors, so you can see everything is this sort of teal and dark blue, a system of headings and subheadings with 2 different font sizes, both in dark green. So here you can see a section heading and then a subheading. The unique use of pull quotes, that is large font to show quotes that are being pulled out here and here. And lots of white space. This is a very, very balanced document. Combined, these design features make the document stand out compared to a document that uses, say, the default settings of Microsoft Word. Further, the decisions caught my eye and pulled my attention to points in the report that the authors clearly wanted me to notice, regardless of my own interests. For instance, this comparison table with bright colors that immediately attract my eye, even though I might not necessarily have read that section based solely on the title, comparing conventional practices to emerging practices in mining. For the purposes of this project, I want you to develop a layout for your report that goes beyond the default Microsoft Word settings, in the same way that this report that I'm showing you does. For instance, you might decide to add an accent color throughout the document, such as the accent colors used here, that gives your report a consistent and engaging style. Or you might decide to use a 2-column layout, horizontal orientation, graphic headers and footers, pull quotes, hyperlinks, etc. There are so many decisions that you can make, and each impacts how your audience perceives the content of your report in subtle but important ways. That is, your decisions are rhetorical choices. They impact the audience in very tangible ways. So in addition to the supra-textual design elements, the organizational and structural elements that Kostelnik talks about, he also distinguishes between intertextual design, such as bullets, lists, and tables, and extra-textual design, visuals, lines, graphs, bar charts, etc. Where'd that go? So, but now you should realize that we've been working with these three categories of design, supertextual, extratextual, and intertextual, throughout the semester. We just haven't used these terms. During this final unit, we're going to return to extratextual and intertextual design elements, as each group must include visuals that complement, supplement, repeat, or clarify key information in their report. Like supertextual design, extratextual design features, such as a diagram or a bar chart, and you can see some examples. There we go. These supertextual design extratextual design elements are used strategically in technical reports to clearly and persuasively expand or clarify details that are complex, subtle, easy to misinterpret, or important enough that they merit attention. For this project, you're required to create 2 original textual design elements and include at least 2 non-original designs with proper citation and attribution. When deciding on the type of visuals to include, I want you to think rhetorically. What visuals would best support your purpose, engage your audience, and refine your argument? Extratextual design elements can significantly impact how audiences engage with or respond to your document. So it's important to spend time evaluating and considering the visuals that you use. Last semester, I had a group that submitted as their original visual an Excel pie chart and an Excel line graph. When I asked them why they chose these particular visuals, one student admitted that they were boring, but he knew Excel. My response was, if you think they are boring, your audience is also going to think they're boring, and they're going to skip them. So what's the point? Why include visuals that you know aren't good? Visuals are used in technical writing in part because they can more effectively communicate certain kinds of information than text, but also because they catch the eye, break up large amounts of text, and add a visual style and professional ethos to otherwise plain documents. In the remainder of this lecture, I want to talk about some of the different kinds of extratextual design elements that have been successful in the past, or that would be particularly effective for some of the topics that you might be pursuing. For each type, I've included an example from the Gold King mine disaster to illustrate what I'm talking about. So the first type of extratextual design element that I want to talk about that you might use is timelines. If you're looking at incidents where time plays a critical role in how information was documented, circulated, and received by the public, timelines can be a great way to visually represent chronological information in a simple and direct way, while calling attention to not only when things happened, but also how they relate to other events happening at the same time. So the example that I've found, here we go. It's kind of small, but there we go. So the timeline that I found shows the initial hours after the release of polluted water plotted on a map of the river shed. So it's both a timeline and a map. It shows the release was at 10:30 a.m. on Wednesday, and then describes how quickly it moved from the Gold King mine through the San Juan National Forest and out into Durango. If I was producing a report based on this, I might include this timeline to quickly and effectively illustrate the timeline of the original incident and just how to contextualize it. If I only talked about the initial release, people wouldn't get a sense of the full extent of the incident. The second type of visual that I want to talk about is comparison charts. Comparison charts are one way of setting up a direct comparison between an incident and similar or related incidents, such as showing how one situation relates to others. This is not specific to the Gold King mine disaster, but it shows a comparison of different kinds of spills and different kinds different areas of the world where these spills happened based on the impact, from severe to no known impact. A comparison chart can be really effective to present information related to two different subjects side by side so that the differences and similarities become accentuated. While you might create a comparison chart for two different incidents, the subjects might also be more specific, such as comparing, say, two different vehicles if you're looking at emissions, or contrasting different procedures and processes, juxtaposing different statistics about different materials. While I couldn't find a comparison chart for the Gold King mine, this one compares pollution in a way that is very visually engaging. Another type of visual are maps. For groups with location-specific incidents, maps can be a great way to help readers unfamiliar with the location visualize the context for the incident. While the most convenient way to create maps is a Google Map Maker, or to find a map and to use it, I've also had groups sketch their own maps or add their own content to pre-existing maps. You might actually decide to create a map if you can't find one that shows what you want. Maps are by far the most common visual that I found related to the Gold King mine. Even the timeline that I just showed you was on a map. The map that I selected shows the location of the mine in relation to sites downriver where water samples were collected and tested. Clicking on each of these dots brings up information and links to other sources about the collection. So you can see that the original map that I showed earlier, this one, that only shows down to Durango, so between Silverton and Durango. Looking at this map, you can see that it was a much broader, much larger, much more significant space that was also impacted. Maps are also something that everyone knows how to use. Maps are a kind of a universal thing. And there are different ways to do maps, but keep in mind that you can either make your own map or you can find existing maps. Another type of visual is flowcharts or process diagrams. Many groups have selected topics where the order and sequence of events is particularly important, either because what happened contrasts with what ought to have happened, or because there are conflicting reports about what actually occurred. In these cases, a process diagram or flowchart can be useful for breaking down each step, showing the direct sequence of events, and illustrating relationships between events. So I have found a process chart, a flowchart, illustrating the main requirements of mine waste disposal. It shows the intricate processes required for this particular policy. If I were using this, I could show where it failed, to show the kind of wastewater disposal that the Gold King mine involved. Often, you can create your own flowcharts if a flowchart doesn't already exist. They're fairly easy to make. You can make them on Word or PowerPoint even. And they can be really effective. It doesn't need to be this complex, but it can show information in a very visually engaging way. I also recommend not using grayscale. I think this was a photocopy. Using colors can be a great way to make it more visually appealing. The fifth type of image that I want to talk about briefly is sketches, blueprints, and schematics. Given that this is a technical writing course, some of the information you might want to communicate could be highly technical in nature, and thus difficult to describe in words. Sketches, blueprints, schematics, and diagrams are different methods for communicating information that is often invisible, complex, highly detailed, or just massive. While you don't need to recreate a full set of schematics for an airplane engine or blueprints for a nuclear reactor, you might select a part or a component of these larger systems, one that's particularly important to your narrowed argument, in order to call out more detail. So the sketch that I found shows how water built up in the Gold King mine. You can see here's the mine, here's the water, here's the location of the mine that was sealed. The blowout that occurred then sent heavy metal loaded water down into the river, affecting the environment. This is a simple sketch, and this might be something that you make. This might be something, again, that you find and cite. But in either case, sketches, diagrams, things like this are a great way of showing a complex process. If I were using this in a report, I would name it Figure 1 or whatever. I would give it a caption explaining what the reader is seeing, and then I would reference it directly in the text. So see Figure 5 for an example of how water builds up in abandoned mines, or whatever. The final type of image that I want to talk about is sequential images. So sequential images are when you take one or more images and put them in order to show progression. One of the most effective rhetorical moves in a report can be to show a sequence of images that capture changes over time, show a movement, or document an object in different states. If it's impossible to show just one state, or not as rhetorically effective, not as impactful on the audience, then having sequential images can be a great way of getting that impact. For example, with the Gold King mine disaster, this image of the Animas River before and during the blowout offer a striking portrait of just how much polluted water was released in the river. This is the same river, the same stretch of river, the same exact location on the river. One where it's clear and beautiful and you have people kayaking, and one where it is bright orange. If I just had this orange river, that's striking. But putting the two of them together in this way, man, that is impactful, showing just the scale of how much water, polluted water, was released to make the river turn this orange color. Okay, so these are just some ideas. And there are many other types of visuals that you might create or cite depending on the topic and what you're trying to communicate. The last thing that I want you to consider is placement within the report itself. One repeated problem that I've noticed when looking at many drafts and many of this kind of document over time is with supertextual design and extratextual design elements conflicting. That is, adding images tends to create gaps in white space, which most people don't know how to address. For instance, if you have a paragraph and then a large image, you might not have space to fit in another whole paragraph, so you just leave the bottom of the page empty. Or, if you have a really large image at the top of a page, it might create a gap at the bottom of the previous page. If you look at most reports or scientific articles, you'll notice that such gaps simply do not exist. It's not that they don't encounter this problem, but rather that they creatively address it. They tighten the space. This was something that I said multiple times in your instruction documents. Remove the gaps, tighten up the white space. Because space is at a premium, when designers are working on supertextual and extratextual elements of a page, they will seek a balance between the two and adjust one or the other as needed. In the above situation, there are at least three possible solutions. First, you could simply make the image smaller. Reducing the size of the image will allow you to fit it at the bottom of the page. Second, you could shift part of the next paragraph up and have it begin at the bottom of the page, and then move the image. Or you could shift the image to the next page, so it starts at the top of the page or in the middle of the page, rather than at the bottom of the previous page. And then you would need to move your text up to fill in the gaps. This last solution tends to be the most difficult for students to understand, as it often means an image would be placed after the text that references it, rather than above it or in line, which feels more intuitive. Part of the reason I think students struggle with this is because most people aren't used to seeing their work in print, let alone designing a page for a newspaper or magazine layout, where such challenges are everyday occurrences. Think about in a newspaper, you have the front page article, there's only so much space on the front page, so they'll say, see page A12 for the rest of this story. And then you just go and you see the rest of the story. If you think about your report as a possible printed document, not just as a file submitted for a grade in a class, the design decisions amount to real costs. You can see multiple examples of how the designers or editors address spatial constraints in Koselleck, such as when he references figure 8 on page 22. So you have 2 pages, and you can see the way that they have put the entire image on the right, rather than shrinking it down and putting it in line. This is a 2-column page, where 1 column is entirely a large image. You can also see that this is page 16, this is page 17, here's figure 3, and here's the references to figure 3, which are on the next page. Assuming that this was, a PDF and not a 2-page spread like this, you might not see the image on the immediate next page. This is why I asked you to label, caption, and directly reference for all images. Adjusting the image, the text, or the page design is necessary to create a cohesive, consistent, and tight document without gaps and white space, but it might require you to do things like captioning and figure numbers and referencing, see figure 3, in order to make that system make sense with the content that you have. That's it for this lecture. Thank you so much for listening to these lectures throughout the semester. Hopefully you found them useful and enlightening, and good luck as you finish up Unit 3.